I guess I would ask that you sort of address the underlying fear in the question more than the question itself. And when you were talking about search, everything that you were talking about was search from the perspective of me going out and searching and getting results back. It seems to me that there is at least as much search happening today with not just Google, but anyone whom I interact with in a commercial way on the internet, researching me and pushing information about, that they think I'm interested in to me. I'm not a technophobe and I use Google every day. I love the internet. However, sometimes I do wonder how much I'm selling my soul to the devil, so to speak. Just how much is known about me. I'm sure I'd be more concerned about what the government knows about me than what a commercial company knows about me. But, there is that concern there, and if you could speak to that
Absolutely.
concern.
Privacy and anonymity on the web. Your last comment was very interesting. There's one way of describing the difference between the US and Europe is that in the US, people are more worried about what the government knows about you than what companies know about you. In Europe, people are more worried about what companies know about you than what the government knows about you. But this idea of privacy or anonymity, the idea that when you do anything on the web, you leave breadcrumbs, it's not actually a new issue in kind. This issue's been there for a long time. As anyone who gets physical mail from catalogs that they never signed up for are familiar with. But it's definitely a difference in degree. The amount of time you spend online doing things that leave some sort of trail is much, much higher than the amount of time you ever used to spend signing up for legitimate mail order catalogs in the past. And the amount, in your imagination, certainly, it's a lot easier for computers to remember everything you've done than it is for these old systems that who knows how they were going to remember everything you've done or to make it available. You go and you buy something at a Gap in New Jersey, and then later you buy something at a Gap in California, and the California guys know what you did in New Jersey now. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they wouldn't have known that. It would have been too much trouble, even though they're the same company, the same store. It would be too much trouble to get the information from one to the other. So people, I think, are legitimately looking at that and saying it's so much easier for people, companies, organizations, projects to collect information about me and to share that information. How do I feel about that? What am I going to do? What am I going to do to handle that? And I think that even though technology has made this question more pressing now than it's been in the past, it's not really a technology question. The answer is not to say, oh, we're going to institute this technological solution for you to hide whatever, we're going to use this technological doodad that you can do, and then we'll promise that if you do that, then nothing bad will happen to you. It's really a social issue. And the social issue takes two forms. One is navigating this line of what's acceptable for people, companies and so forth, to know about you and to kind of remember about you as time goes on and how it's appropriate to use it. And then the second part of that is putting in a legal framework in place that will enforce those new norms and give people confidence that they're being enforced. I think that last bit, having confidence that they're enforced, is as important a part of it. And you see that happening already. You see that starting to happen. There are rules about how privacy policies have to be put in place. There are laws about what you can and can't share about certain types of information. Medical information was one of the first. But it's a slow process. And I think until there's general agreement, and I think, again, getting back to this distinction between the US and Europe, the agreement may differ from place to place, from country to country, even within a country. But until there's general agreement about what's right and wrong, it's going to be hard for people to ever feel secure that companies and people are doing right by you. But on the other hand, I'm not really worried about it. I think over time that, as we gain more experience with this, as we talk it out, that kind of consensus will come. And then Once it does, then there will become the norms that companies, well-behaved companies will follow to do it, and people will more or less trust the well-behaved companies to be acting well, and the issue will kind of die down. But in the meantime, it's definitely, something to think about, and I encourage, all of you to be an active part of this discussion and be thinking about what's important to you, about, the benefits that you get from sharing information and the cost that you pay. Think about the trade-off it's right for you.
I have a two-part question for you here. The first part is, you guys have been doing a great job in remaining impartial with the search results, etc. But how can you ensure that you're going to remain impartial, 10, 20 years into the future? For example, you have the results being manipulated in China because of the government over there. And the second part of the question is, are you personally worried that your data centers are going to rise up and try to take over the world?
So the second question is easier to answer. The data centers have a fatal flaw right now. They have a weakness that we can exploit. And that is that they use a huge amount of power. They're not self-sufficient data centers. So that's why when we build our data centers, we build them very close to hydroelectric dams and renewable power. They can be anywhere, basically. We can take advantage of that. But all you got to do is snip the wire, the power coming in, and the data centers will flop useless to the ground. So I'm not very worried about them taking over the world. The first question about impartial results, certainly there's no telling what's going to happen to Google after the founders move on, all of us die, and Google moves into maybe who knows what's going to happen to it. But I am confident that as long as there's competition in the space, it's going to be difficult for Google to start manipulating the search results and get away with it. Because it's very easy to change from one search engine to another. The term of art in our field is stickiness. And it's very difficult to change from Facebook to a different social website because all your friends are on Facebook and they're not on this other website. But search engine is very easy to change. You just, instead of typing google.com, you type in yahoo.com and you do searches. If the day comes where you feel that the Google search results aren't doing you well because they're being manipulated in some way that's not to your advantage, then you'll just switch. And I'm pretty confident that will happen. We've definitely seen it happen before as the top search engine changed from time to time. And it keeps us honest. Personally, I'm glad of that as a user of search engines myself. So I'm not really worried about that happening as long as there's robust competition in search, which there certainly is.
I have two questions. One is, does Google's algorithm recognize two separate words joined without any punctuation, like is used in company names and domains, like Creative Communications? Will it separate those two words in search results and give you results even though there's no punctuation between them? And the second part is, does Google's map system now have or planning to develop a service for trucking industries where it will recognize restricted roads or roads that are inadequate for trucks and toll roads and that kind of thing?
Okay, two good questions, very different from each other. The answer to the first question is easy, it's yes. Everyone's seen the spelling correction that Google does, where it says, did you mean this and that? We use it internally as well to try to get better search results. And one of the ways that we use it internally is we decide when words can be split up or combined to get good results, and we throw those in. As for maps, truck directions, that's an issue that's near and dear to my heart. Ever since we went on an off-site picnic a year ago, and I guess the bus driver got the direction from an online map service or something, because we ended up stuck under a bridge that wasn't quite high enough for our bus. So I would certainly love to see that feature. We've been concentrating on bike routes recently. We recently just published that where we had knowledge about bike trails. I guess there's a new one opening up here soon. This is there. Hopefully that'll make it into the system. We're focusing on bike trails and the best way to bike. But who knows what might come next? I think trucking kinds of restricted roads makes a lot of sense.
There was a time that the Google executives sat on the board of Apple Computer, now Apple Inc. How do you see these two companies' relationships playing out in the near term and in the more distant future?
Wow. How do I see Google and Apple's relationship playing out in the future? I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole. Sorry, we'll have to wait and see.
Craig, that's a disappointing answer. From the people who have answers to everything.
The way I like to think of it is life is more exciting if you don't know exactly what's happening.
Put that up on my Mac.
What do you see as the future of medical information? How it will be accessed and searched?
What's the future of medical information? There's this Google Health effort, which we're doing to try to make, personal health records. I guess the electronic health field is very complicated, and there's all these kind of moving pieces. We're certainly trying to play a role in at least one of these pieces, and everyone's talking about all the advantages of medical health records. Some of the privacy concerns that we mentioned earlier are a bigger factor with health than they are with almost any other issue. So as we try to figure those things out, it's been a prerequisite for doing a lot of these efforts in computerization as well. I think the process is moving along, and I think that in the end, people will end in a place where people are like, why weren't we here sooner? But it's definitely a deliberate process. I think it's one that a lot of people are paying attention to.
So I thought the interaction between Google and China recently was rather interesting. I kind of had a two-parted question. First part being, what do you think the appropriate line for a company like Google to walk between, the kind of the classic motto, do no evil, your social and ethical responsibility? How do you walk that line with the other side being your rights as a company to make money? And then secondly, more personally, Google and yourself are in a position of great power, right? What do you think is more appropriate for a company like China, giving them limited search results and still supplying them with some kind of independent information, or saying, no, we're not going to give you anything until your government consents?
So, for people who haven't been following what's been happening with Google and China, has anyone not been following what's been happening? Yeah, I'll put it out there. What's most interesting to me about this whole relationship between Google and China is it's a very stark indication of the way in which companies are driven by, philosophy and personality. A major reason that Google left China was because of Sergey Brin, one of our founders, who grew up until he was 7 or 8 in communist Russia and was very much shaped by that experience and saw a parallel between what's happening with censorship in China today and what was happening with censorship in Soviet Russia when he was growing up. And he did not find that acceptable and was really pushing, as a result, for Google to reconsider our policy towards China. When we first got into China, and this touches on your second question, we made the decision, there's no good decision to make. We made the decision that the lesser of the two evils was to make information available as much as we could. We thought that Google was better than other search engines available in China at the time, and giving that benefit to the Chinese people would, in the end, cause an opening up of censorship, or a lessening of censorship and opening up of intellectual expression that would be a net benefit. Over time, we didn't see that happening to the extent we wanted to, and eventually made the decision that the censorship wasn't worth us countenancing by being in China, as we would have had to do. And so we made that decision to pull out. The basic decision is one that we made one way. A company could legitimately make it the other way. There are arguments on either side. There are certainly plenty of companies that are still in China. And we did give up a real opportunity to make a difference in the Chinese market. We're still there. We have a little more roundabout way of getting the search results than we used to, but it's one that apparently the Chinese government can live with. But there's no question it's different than it used to be. And we took a stand based on our principles, basically. And I'm proud of the decision we made, but there's no question that there are interesting arguments on either side. And at the end, you have to kind of or at least we had to go with like our moral and philosophical